Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by SharedServicesLink and sponsored by AppZen. Today, we'll be looking at Airbus flying high with AI and looking at how they are aiming to achieve 99% accuracy in T&E. My name is Sarah Fane, and I am the head of content at SharedServicesLink. And I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert presenters and panelists. We have Richard Masci, the head of Financial Systems, Services and Compliance at Airbus Americas, Waqas Aman, the Financial Systems and Compliance Manager at Airbus Americas, and Charlie Warne, a Solution Consultant at AppZen. You, of course, have a very important role to play in today's webinar as well, and that is to make sure that you get the most out of this hour. The joy of live events, even if they are virtual, is that we are here to answer your questions. So we will be taking your questions throughout the webinar. The best way to ask them is using the question functionality, which is usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you submit your questions to us, we'll be taking them in about the last 10 minutes of the webinar. You'll also want a copy of the slides. These will be sent to everybody who has registered for the webinar today, and they'll also be on our site, sharespace.digital. A copy of the recording will be available tomorrow as well. So let's just take a moment to take a look at the context for today. So no need to dwell on it, but we all know that with the COVID pandemic, we saw a lot more home working and economic strain. So companies have been turning to advanced technologies like AI to gain an advantage. And today, we're going to be looking at how early adopter Airbus Americas has been using AI-powered spend technology in T&E since 2018, and some of the tremendous results they've seen in that time. So today, Richard and Waqas will be revealing their successes they've had with AppZen's spend technology and sharing the journey that they've been on. So before I hand over to them, we do just have 2 poll questions that we'd like to ask. So coming up on your screen is the first one. So we want to know, are you using AI in your operations? So yes, we're using it in our department. Are you using it but in other parts of the business? Are you perhaps piloting it in your department? Is this something that you're currently researching? Or is it just not right on your radar yet? So great to see good engagement on this poll question. We've got about 60% of you voting. So I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and the results are coming up on your screen now. So I think this is probably a figure that's grown in the last few years. 38% of you said that you are using it in your department. 13% say you're using it in other parts of the business. Another 13% say you're piloting it in your department. Significant growth in this area as 38% are researching it, and none of you said it's not on your radar yet. So we have one more poll that we'd like to run. And we want to know, does your company monitor and audit 100% of your expense spend? So you say, yes, we audit 100% of our expense spend. Are you perhaps close to that, but not 100%? Would you say that you do audits and spot checks, but it's a long way from 100%? Or that no, you don't audit your expense claims? Again, we'll be sharing the results, but it'd be great to see how everybody on this webinar is comparing. So we have currently a 50-50 split, so hopefully we can get a few more answers. We'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and the results are coming up on your screen. So 44% of you say you do monitor and audit 100% of your expense spend. 11% say you're close, but not 100%. And 44% say you do audits and spot checks, but a long way from 100%. And none of you said that you don't audit your expense claims. So interesting results there. So thank you for that. And now I would like to hand over to Richard from Airbus.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Today with Waqas, we're going to basically explain the Airbus journey related to our trial and expense solution that we basically implemented a long time ago, but we basically enhanced it with AppZen. So Today, during our agenda, we're going to look at this travel and expense Airbus journey. We're going to talk after that about the shared service approach that, thanks to AppZen, we were able to kind of put in place in Airbus Americas. The third element that we're going to talk about is all the different KPIs that we put in place to manage performance, automation, and reduction of effort that are basically for us the main ones. And we're going to close this presentation with a kind of travel and expense optimization project that we launched after being able to understand all the benefit that we got from AppZen, and basically this eye opener that we got related to the results of our KPIs. So I suggest that we switch right away to the next slide, and we talk about this this amazing journey that in fact we went through with Waqas and the team in Airbus. So what is, I think, very important to understand is that before 2018 and before in fact we launched this project, we were reviewing, I would say, 100% of our expense manually. So what does it mean? It means that, of course, we are going through a very complex process of viewing expense reports. Some of them were in different languages than English. We were lucky because at that time our T&E analyst was also kind of Spanish and from the US, so capable of at least looking at 2 languages. But you understand that Airbus is a worldwide company, and we had a lot of different trips happening in Spain, which is fine, but in Germany, in France, and in China. I mean, basically all over the world, and theoretically, a human being is kind of capable of doing probably amazing things, but probably not capable of looking at all those different languages in a very accurate way. So all that basic manual work was great, but we needed to do better. And that was exactly the objective of what we decided to launch when we discovered AppZen. So in basically 2018, when we analyzed what AppZen could basically bring to our company, we decided to launch the project right away. And end of 2018 and 2019, early 2019, we were able to activate AppZen, and we were able to activate the automation in AppZen, which in fact, from that point, created a lot of expected results. But in fact, it went probably even faster than what we were expecting initially. And so from that, of course, automation was one of the elements that we are also expecting a lot in terms of compliance. And compliance in Airbus is an extremely central topic. And AppZen, in fact, became very quickly a key element of our Airbus control and compliance strategy. And it helps us tracking gift and hospitality activities, and as well, secures anti-corruption and anti-robbery activities that are related to travel and expense. At the end, thanks to AppZen, we have today a fully digital solution. This solution, once again, is fully compliant, and Waqas will explain that later in the presentation, how we can say that. And we also have a complete audit trail. Something interesting is that even though AppZen is used mainly in Airbus in Americas, our auditors in Europe, they have access to AppZen, and they can easily check in full transparency what's going on a regular basis on our travel and expense process. So I'm going to now hand over the microphone to Waqas for him to explain the matrix for success for this project. Waqas?
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so when we started off with this journey, we started by asking ourselves a basic question, like, what do we want to achieve with this project? So the 2 things that came as a consensus was that we wanted to increase the compliance, and we also wanted to reduce the reduce the effort in processing the expense report. With that in mind, we came up with 5 distinct work streams to focus on. Number 1 was the processes. So processes, when we talk about processes, the processes of expense report processing, the process of master data management, how the master data is being created and how it works, how it flows between the different ERP systems. Also, the accounting process, how the expense is being booked in our ERP system and how it is being shown in our provincial financial statements, and as well as the governance process, which is very important so that if in case something out of the ordinary happens, we know where to route the expense report and which party needs to address that. Number 2 was policy alignment. Policy alignment was really important because when we started off, we realized that our policy was in a gray area, but in order to achieve automation, it has to be purely black and white. Just to give you an example, we had in certain cases for like lunch and dinner expenses, our policy stated that it has to be a reasonable amount. But in order to achieve automation, the computer needs to decide what is reasonable about. Reasonable for me can be a different number, and reasonable for someone else can be a very different number. With that in mind, we made our policy very black and white, cleared out a lot of ambiguities from there. And also in the process of correcting that, we came up with an acceptable risk of 99.18%. And then the systems. Again, systems are very fundamental in achieving automation. And then we chose the best in class in the market, and we came up with Concur and AppZen. The combination of both two gave us the right tool in order to achieve the automation. Business intelligence, we used that for to track all our KPIs, and we use SAP Analytics Cloud for that. It is very important because it gives us a trend of where and how the project is going and which area we need to focus on and which area we need to put our resources on, because it gives us clear idea or where the business is going. And again, the last point was the communication and the behavioral change, which includes the travel policy, the proper expense reimbursement guideline to the employees so that they know where and how to get reimbursed using which channel, and the optimization of all the processes. And again, since some employees were using the same process for a lot of years, that they realized they thought in their mind that this is the right way, and bringing about that change was very important. And again, I would say for any project, the change management is very fundamental and sometimes very challenging. So with that in mind, this was the matrix for automation and success for us. With that, I'll hand over to Richard to talk about the shared service approach that Airbus applied.
Thank you, Waqas. So, as you can see, based on this overall project and all the different work streams that we worked on, ultimately we reached our goal to increase the automation, make sure that we secure compliance within this process. And ultimately, when we started to have positive results aligned with our expectations, and one of the main elements that Waqas mentioned is the 99% accuracy that we wanted to reach before activating this automation. When we basically reached that point, we decided that, in fact, we could go further. And one of the additional elements that we started to think about with Waqas was to activate a shared service on the travel expense activity in North America. And from that, we started to activate, in fact, AppZen on all the other entities that were running Concur, making sure that from that they could potentially experience the same positive result as what we experienced in Airbus America. And so very quickly, we enhanced AppZen to not only the commercial division, but also the helicopter division and the space and defense division. And very quickly, AppZen started to be activated in all those different entities with one goal at one point is to centralize, in fact, the management of the travel and expense solution. What does it mean? It means that, in fact, with AppZen, you start adding a new resource in your team. And this new resource, in fact, is a pure robot, once again, an artificial intelligence robot. And this robot, in fact, has the great benefit not to be sick, not to go on strike. I'm French, so I know what I'm talking about. And also making sure that, you know, this robot can work 24/7 days a week, and in fact 365 days a year. In addition, of course, when you have some high-risk expense reports that are systematically blocked for manual review, we also need someone that can review that. But you understand that we have, in this case, some additional capabilities to allocate more time. And that's why the shared service becomes an option when you activate AppZen, because suddenly you free some time that can be allocated to other entities. And so we brought all those entities, and now, as you can see, we have activities in Mexico, in the US, of course, in Canada, and we are starting to expand also in the UK. We have some other projects going on that will probably increase this expansion. So a lot going on with that, but once again, AppZen was clearly the trigger for this amazing journey. I'm going to let Waqas explain the different KPIs that we have on the bottom right that are very key for this global journey. Waqas?
Yeah. So just keep in mind the figures that we're presenting are pre-COVID figures. So just before the COVID pandemic hit us, we managed to achieve 60% automation and touchless processing of reports. So when we talk about automatic processing of reports, what we mean is like AppZen gives a risk score to each and every expense report that has been submitted by high, medium, and low. And what we decided that we will let AppZen process medium and low risk reports automatically. So that's the 60% automation that we achieved, which resulted in a direct reduction of effort of 91%. And just to give you an idea, what we mean by reduction of effort is, for example, if an expense report has 100 line items, and out of that 100 line items, only 2 line items are high risk. Previously, our T&E person had to look at all the 100 line items and audit them manually. But now, if the only 2 line items are high risk, the T&E person just have to look at the 2 high risk line items, and the remaining 98 line items are automatically processed, and he or she doesn't even have to look at it. So it translates into a very, very high reduction of effort. And we managed to achieve 100% compliance. And because as Richard talked, we're talking about a robot over here, and it's very difficult for a human to compete with a robot. Since the amount of languages that the system can process and the memory of the tool of all receipts, for example, AppZen is able to track duplicate receipts across multiple employees over multiple years, and also fake and forged receipts are also highlighted by AppZen, as well as it's also capable of detecting anti-bribery and corruption checks, and also does a check on politically exposed persons. So one example I can give you is one of our employees went out for dinner with a similar name of a person who was listed in a politically exposed person list, and AppZen was able to catch it. And upon further investigation, we realized that the person shared the name, but AppZen was still able to catch that. So, and again, as Richard mentioned, our auditors have access to AppZen, and they can monitor our compliance in real time from Europe. So, Richard, do you want to explain the reduction of FTE and reduction of cost from here? What
thank you very much for this explanation on the three. No, we stay on the same slide, please, Sarah. We go back. Thank you. So, Waqas explained automation, reduction of effort, and compliance. What is interesting as well is the reduction of FTE. In fact, FTE meaning full-time equivalent. So before 2018, before in fact the activation of AppZen, we used to have our resource basically working 100% of the time, of course, and in some cases, in fact, that resource. You have peaks when you have travel and expense activities. Usually at the end of the year, people, they submit all their expense reports because they want to be reimbursed for the trip happening during the year. And so this peak, in fact, was sometimes creating even 200% of activity. So a lot of overtime that we had, in fact, to cover, of course, related to the different T&E analysts. And after activating AppZen and after reaching all the amazing percentages that Waqas explained, in fact, we suddenly realized that we divided by 10 our usage of the human being for this process. So somehow, at one point, if we reach 2 FTE to do the same job, today we are at 0.2 FTE. So it's really a division by 10. And once again, this is one of the elements that allowed us to put in place this, this shared service by, in fact, using almost the same number of human beings, but bringing more entities into the same scope. At the same time, when you do that, of course, you have an amazing reduction of costs. And we, in fact, after analyzing all of that, we had a clear reduction of cost of approximately 88.6%. Sorry for the very specific amount, but we honestly, we track that in a very accurate way. And all those amazing KPIs basically show the power that AppZen can bring to an organization when the system is activated with the proper process. So let's now switch to the next slide, because the next slide, in fact, explains in a more detailed way these two very critical KPI that we track on a regular basis in Airbus. The first one being the automation that Waqas explained, and the second one being the reduction of effort. On this particular chart, we continue tracking automation on a percentage basis. The reduction of effort, in fact, is the number of lines that are processed basically manually. And as you can see, the chart can speak by itself, but Waqas can give a clear explanation of what happened between 2018 and the pre-COVID pandemic. Waqas?
Yeah, so we started off implementing AppZen end of 2018. And as you can imagine, before that, we were processing all of expense report manually. So as soon as we triggered and switched on AppZen's automation, we came up to 13% automation straight away, and which was quite a good news for us and very encouraging signs. But upon further fine-tuning of the system based on our policy and our rules, in 6 months, we managed to achieve 35% automation and significant reduction of effort. And after that, something very interesting happened was like we saw a change in behavior in employees. So previously, what they were submitting was being approved by not too stringent constraints, but now they realize that the robot is rejecting the expense report. So they became more compliant by themselves. And this change in behavior brought upon increase in automation to 53% and also a very high degree of reduction of effort. And we need to keep in mind that during between 2018 and 2019, there was a 30% increase in the expense reports being submitted. And even with that, we see a big reduction in effort of number of lines being processed manually. And just before the COVID hit us, we managed to hit 58% automation. And again, the trend line of reduction of effort kept on reducing. And then Richard can give you a good understanding of how we approached the COVID pandemic and post that.
Thank you, Waqas. So as you can see on the right part of this chart, covering the COVID pandemic, right at the basically peak of the pandemic, and when all travel started to basically be totally stopped, of course we felt it just like any other entities. It's not like Airbus was a specific case. We all unfortunately experience that drop in travel. But what is interesting to see on this chart is that, in fact, even though we were experiencing a drop in travel, we shouldn't have experienced such a reduction on the percentage of automation. Why? Because if you reduce your travel and it's a percentage, so you should keep the same automation no matter what. But when we started to realize with the team that we were in fact experiencing a drop in automation, suddenly we realized that something was wrong. And that's why we started to look at all the figures in a more specific way. And that's why, piloting the performance of AppZen is very important, because suddenly you can see that things might not be that great ultimately. And when we looked at on the back end, we suddenly realized that a lot of work should be done to kind of optimize even more our process. And so this 19%, in fact, that we reached somehow in April was really a red flag for us to say our process is not optimized. And so we launched this project, called basically optimization project, to kind of secure that during the pandemic, we would kind of go back to a more normal percentage of automation. But at the same time, we were also, of course, aiming after the pandemic. What's going to happen when we're going to start resuming travel? What are our objectives to make sure that we can get probably where we want to be, which is definitely not 60%. We want to achieve even better than that. And so during the pandemic, in fact, it was the right time for us to really look at all the details of our T&E solution and make sure that in December, we were ready to entry into service with this kind of new Concur process. And AppZen, helping us in that direction. And as you can see, after December, when we activated this kind of new process, we right away felt an increase of automation, even though at that time travel were still not really resuming. So we were starting to achieve what we needed to achieve to get prepared for the after pandemic. And so that's exactly, I think, for us, one of the elements that was key. AppZen is not only here basically to bring automation and make sure that you basically achieve compliance. It's also here to help you looking at things in a different way and basically piloting your travel expense activity the best way possible. And if you trigger and you activate great KPIs, you can really expense what we expense, but you can also improve a lot. So let's now talk about this optimization project, because this was a key element of our T&E solution in 2020. So as you can see on the bottom of this slide, basically we used to have in the past, so basically before this optimization project in 2018, 2019, and 2020, we used to have approximately 70% of travel activities managed in Concur and in AppZen. So basically the remaining 38% were in fact a mix of 60% of procurement spend, 8% of HR spend, and 4% of unfortunately not applicable. So, and this not applicable, by the way, was kind of a bit worrying, because we didn't know, in fact, what we could do with that. An example for this NA, we used to have an expense type called miscellaneous. So basically, you can imagine what our users, they were doing with that. They were just dumping a lot of expenses on these miscellaneous expense types without any explanations. And of course, it was systematically blocked by AppZen for a manual review. So at the end, we started to look at all of that, and we said, okay, so we have in fact 38% of non-travel that we have to reduce, because not only it creates a lack of automation, it blocks those expense reports for pure automation, but it's also non-compliant with our Airbus processes. And so we decided to launch this optimization project, and the result was today we have 90% of activities in Concur that are related to travel and that AppZen manages. And we have now reduced to 5% of procurement activities and 5% of HR activities. So one example for each. On the HR side, we have sometimes employees that seek to follow training online. So what they're going to do, they're going to use their credit card to basically pay for this online training. And of course, in order to make sure that we are still agile in some of our processes, we allow this type of expense. And so they are extremely, I would say, followed. And there's a process of validation, but ultimately we allow them to use Concur for this type of things, and AppZen can review that. On the procurement side, an example that is typical, and that, by the way, happened, unfortunately, one of our plant managers arrived in the morning in one of the plants, and unfortunately water was everywhere. So of course, they're not going to basically start launching a purchase order to do this type of things. Right away, they called the contractor came, they fixed the issue, and they paid with their credit card. From that, it was totally processed under our non-travel policy and managed through Concur and AppZen. So this type of very specific processes that require agility, we basically allow them in Concur and AppZen, but nothing else. So from that, we reduced our expense types in Concur from 57 to 38, bringing a lot of simplification as well in our overall process. At the same time, because we made some changes that had an impact on our users, of course, we a lot focused on communication. And so we had a lot of different training related to this optimization project, as well as a new expense reimbursement guideline that we activated, which is now a kind of silver lining process for our users to make sure that they know exactly what to do in which case. And this document is extremely detailed with a lot of documentation, a lot of examples that can be used by our users. Of course, they can still contact our support, but this guideline already answers a lot of questions. At the same time, we realized that by using AppZen, we were able to also kind of capture information that in the past we were not able to do. And so we did some fine-tuning in Concur and making sure that those elements that we activated in Concur can be reflected in AppZen to help our tax team to increase tax deductions on use tax and tax recovery. And as you can see, in 2019, we kind of managed to get 238K of tax deduction, which basically helped us getting 60K of tax recovery. And once again, I want to emphasize a very important element, which is related to communication and change management within your organization. This is always a key for a successful project. With all of that, the benefits that we got, thanks to those changes and AppZen support, we increased again compliance by pushing, in fact, back some processes to procurement using POs. We increased efficiency. We improved our guidelines to employees and approver within our T&E process, and we reduced a lot complexity in this T&E solution for both our users and managers. And so all of that, in fact, creates this new kind of T&E solution within Airbus. And we are aiming, in fact, 80% of automation, probably when all travel will resume. I guess it's going to probably be more in 2022 than 2021. We are anyway already in a really good shape to achieve those amazing KPIs. So thanks again for AppZen to support and help us on that. Thank you very much. And I'm going to basically give the microphone back to Sarah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. So I'd now like to hand over to Charlie Warne, who's going to be giving a bit of a demo and showing some of the powers of the AppZen technology. That's great. We can see your screen now. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And hopefully you can hear me. So I'm just going to move a couple of bits out of the way there. Richard and Waqas, thank you very much for that. I mean, it's very, very insightful to hear what you've managed to achieve with AppZen, and it's been a pleasure working with Airbus. So onto, I suppose, the look and feel. So what is it that Airbus and other organisations are using today as part of their audit process? Well, what you see in front of you is the audits workbench. So just kind of put yourself in the T&E auditor's shoes. This is what they would basically be using to mitigate that risk in real time. Firstly, a kind of a quick scene setter, because you're going to see the data in here, which is great. But how does the data get in there? The data actually kind of gets picked up by AppZen in real time as soon as your employees submit their expenses. Whether that's a Concur, a Chrome River, a Cooper, a Workday, whatever it is you might be using, an employee creates their expenses as they would today, using your current policies as a kind of first line of defense, if you like. But as soon as they hit submit, that expense claim is going to come flying through into the AppZen AI engine, where a ton of core AI models are basically waiting to verify and compare that information against internal and external policies, which we'll walk through shortly. And to what Richard and Waqas were talking about, it pushes that risk into three buckets of low, medium, and high. And typically speaking, we'll see that the highest percentage will be low risk. and that will just automatically flow through without anyone needing to kind of look at it or touch it, ready for reimbursement. So what AppZen is there and designed to do is to laser focus the T&E auditor's time and pinpoint exactly where that risk resides. So once that assessment has been done, the auditor can have notifications, they can have their own queues, but what they will be presented with is the following. And you'll see here a list of high-risk expenses. And I'll walk through some of the additional points of those and some of the examples shortly. But Richard was talking about how Airbus Americas have started it out, but having access to to the auditors in Europe and the language capabilities and the nuances that you would have in a T&E policy from country to country and region to region. So this is absolutely designed to scale for the large enterprise. So to have perhaps that overarching global policy with the local variations that you may have to verify certain things such as FAPIAOs in China, or managing different variations of per diems and daily allowances and different VAT rules and regulations and what have you. So there's absolutely that. And then all the different rules that Richard and Waqas were just kind of going through and kind of talking about attendee verification and the anti-bribery and corruption checks. All of this is kind of coming out of the box and then configured accordingly to your business rules. So you'll see here from this drop down, and we're not going to go through all of these today, but I will touch on a few of them. But simple things like amount verification. An employee will tap into the expense system, say 21 euros, they will tap in 210, let's say, but the receipt itself, it will say 21. It's an error, whether it's intentional or not, but it's being able to use AI to read the entirety of that receipt. So not just the amounts, but we're looking at the line items, we're looking at any kind of VAT, any kind of other detail which is within that document to be able to apply these verifications. There was the attendee verification, checking globally. Who are you entertaining? Are you looking at opening a new distribution center somewhere and you've just entertained a local planning officer? Was that okay or was it not? Even if it's okay, it's about capturing that information so you've got that for your reporting purposes. We're going to kind of touch on one shortly, which is duplication that has already been mentioned, and this is extraordinarily powerful and is humanly, I wouldn't say impossible, but it could take months. If you're processing hundreds of thousands of reports a year, it could take months to find a duplicate. We even have industry specific, so for HCP checking. So if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, having AI checks to validate attendees in real time against HCP fugitives, as well as your regular NCI checks and so on and so forth. So I won't label all of these different models for now, but it's really to kind of give you an idea that and the length and breadth of which the AI can be applied. And if you was to think, well, actually, there are additional checks that we need as part of an organization, there is the ability to create custom AI models to manage those complex processes, which may be very unique to yourself. So let's look at some examples. So what we'll see here below are some high-risk expenses which have been submitted. As an auditor, what do I want to make my life easier? I want to see a snapshot of information so I can make an informed decision quickly, but accurately, so then I can move on to the next one or the next part of my day job. So we can see here that we've got an employee, Anna Taylor, who's part of the UK organisation, has submitted this expense claim and has been picked up to have some high risk. So now what I can see is, okay, here's Anna. She's part of the UK expense policy. That's great. I can see the total amount. Wonderful. But what I really want to understand is that out of that whole expense that's been submitted, what elements have high risk? So we can see that this is defaulted to show me just the high risk items. Now for this seminar / course fee expense type, and even the justification of seminar, we can see that there are a couple of different models that have been flagged. Now, just to kind of give you an idea, this is now, again, pinpointing down to the T of what's wrong with this singular line item. What you'll see from this very quickly, this little drop down, everything else which is passed as low risk. We're absolutely fine with the rest of that. So what we can focus on now is, in this case, we're going to look at duplication today. So I believe, Richard, you brought up duplication earlier on. So here we can say, right, there's a duplicate identified, but we need more information. How are we going to mitigate this risk accurately? So what AppZen does is using that AI technology, natural language processing, computer vision, machine learning, all of our own technology, we look at that invoice or receipt image, and we can validate that image against every single expense claim that's ever been submitted across your entire organization, across the whole of time. So then can we say, hey, guess what? Look at the right-hand side. We found a pixel perfect match that's already been paid to either this individual or another employee. Now, this goes further. This goes to even fuzzy matching in different receipt images. So just imagine on the left-hand side, we've got this itemized receipt. Fantastic. Or invoice. If on the right-hand side was a credit card slip that, that gets printed out at the end, there's enough corresponding information on that to say, actually, this is high-risk spend, and it looks like a potential duplicate. So therefore, we're not going to allow it. So duplicate across reports, duplicate within reports, a very powerful model which brings back real-term ROI. And the last thing I'm going to mention on that, and I should have really called this up front, is that AppZen's performing these checks in real time, pre-reimbursement. Nothing is happening after the fact. It's all happening before the fact, so the money never leaves your business in the first place. Okay, so one more example I'm going to run through. So we're going to filter down some high risk. I was going to look at some merchant blacklists and categories today, but we're going to look at unauthorized expenses. So unauthorized expenses can be pretty much anything you want it to be, from alcohol to tobacco to dog kennels to jewelry to spas, whatever it is that you deem as being out of policy. I mean, we've got a whole heap of unauthorized categories. So one would be spa as an example, and within that category would be things like massage. So if you see massage on the receipt, AppZen will pick that up and say, well, hang on a minute, this is out of policy, it doesn't look right. What we're going to look at now, though, is a different user. We're going to look at Mats. So Mats here is a Swedish employee, and what we'll see as we scroll down, we want to look at that unauthorized expense. So not only we can see other line items which are high risk, so his manager has also been found as an attendee, which is out of their particular policy. But what we want to look at here is this car rental. Now, think about travel. Travel is starting to pick up. And we're hoping, you look at the notification by Singapore today, that they're going to look at just going to living normal lives and just treating COVID-19 as the flu. So travel will pick up. So when we book travel, what happens? We book on an online booking tool, typically speaking, if you have a managed travel program, and we book within policy. But what we really care about afterwards, what happened after the fact? So this is where the AI really comes into its own. So looking at this more complex style receipt, AppZen, which does not need any individual training for different receipts or invoice types, will look at this more complex car rental invoice and validate this against your policy. Now, on the right-hand side, if what we'll look at here is it indicates to me as the auditor what's wrong. So we've found that there's a luxury vehicle, there's an upgrade, there are other unauthorized items such as waivers or personal accident insurance, which is part of your policy you're probably going to have in bed already. But what AppZen's seeing here, whether this is in English, whether this is in French, whether this is in Spanish, whether it's Cantonese, Mandarin, Thai, Vietnamese, you name it, we're going to pick this up to say, well, hang on a minute, look, there's Mercedes, and Mercedes, according to your policy, is not allowed. As you look down in the line items, we can find upgrade. So the AI has been able to read the terms upgrade, Mercedes, and at the bottom, personal accident insurance and loss and damage waivers to say, this is against policy. You should not have been allowed to do this. We're going to flag it up accordingly. Now, whether it's the employee who's upgraded or whether it's the cheeky car rental company who said, oh, guess what? I'll give you a day's free upgrade without telling your employee that they'll upgrade you for the full term. So depending on your policy, this is the ability that AppZen has to get under the covers of that receipt and that invoice in 45 different languages to tell you what is wrong and what isn't. Now, the last thing, you have to mitigate this risk. It's not just about viewing this information, it's about what do I do with it. do we approve risk? If we approve risk, you effectively have to add a compensating control, a bit like a governance risk and compliance solution, if you like. Add some commentary stating why you're approving this risk. And then what will happen is that will get logged, time and date stamped, and put into this audit trail. So from when Richard and Waqas are talking about their auditors, they have access to all the additional data as well as an audit trail that for any potentially approved risk. If approved, that just jumps straight back into your expense management workflow and will go on for review by management if you so wish, or for reimbursement. And the last thing I'd like to talk about today is rejection. This is pretty bad stuff. We don't want to allow it to go through. We're going to reject it. The system will basically, yeah, yes, we can reject it. Yes, I want to. Yes, I want to. And it will create an automated message, which will generate an email back to the employee to tell them exactly why it's out of policy. And if we wanted to, we could add additional commentary to say, Dave is not allowed on here. And then we can basically simply reject that out. And it will go back to the employee with that information, and then they can make the decision. What do we do? Do I amend this, delete lines, or do I just not resubmit it because I know that I was wrong? Anyway, that was a short look and feel of the AppZen solution. We barely scratched the surface, but hopefully it kind of gives you a bit of an indication as to what Richard and Waqas were talking about and how this has helped Airbus achieve enormously high percentages of compliance to their T&E policy. With that, I'll pass back to Sarah for Q&A.
That's great. Thank you very much. So I will be taking questions from the audience. The best way to put your question to us is using the question functionality, which is usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. But before I do, we have one last poll we'd like to ask you. So that's just be coming up on your screen now. We want to know, has your organization revised its expense policies and guidelines because of the pandemic? So please take the option that best matches your situation. Would you say yes, you have done so and your employees have been very happy? Yes, and we generally haven't encountered any big issues. Yes, but this has created some challenges. Or no, we haven't had to or haven't revised our guidelines at all. So be interesting to see how you vote here. Got about half of you voting. So I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the results will come up on your screen now. So I will just read through these results and then I'll turn to our panelists for some questions. 50% of you have not had to change your policies at all. The other 50% have. Either 42% say that you haven't encountered any big issues, and 8% says you have, but it has created some challenges. So thanks so much for sharing that. So with that, I would like to turn to our panelists. So first question I'm going to put to Richard and Waqas. You might want to chime in as well. And that is, how did your employees react to the new technology? I suppose the two elements to this, I guess, one, the T&E team that was affected, but also the employees whose policies have been perhaps a bit changed and had to deal with new systems as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very good question, because we were earlier talking about change management, and of course, the change management aims at kind of easing the project towards your users and your managers and so on within the organization. But at the same time, you also need to manage change management within the kind of finance team, in our case, or the T&E team, because it's true, you're bringing a lot of changes, not so much on the user side. Yeah, they experience that, unfortunately, we are getting more stringent. So as Waqas mentioned, but the real change, in fact, when you activate AppZen, is on your internal team reviewing the process. So we had some resistance, of course, and it's true that communication was key during the project phase, making sure that we can explain what's going to be the benefits of all of that. And the fact that we are maybe creating automation, but at the same time, because we're going to expand the scope of T&E, we will definitely not change the workload at one point, because yeah, of course, we said that we would reduce the workload, but at the same time, you reduce the workload of an existing entity, but because you bring new entities, in fact, you kind of increase anyway the overall workload for the T&L analysts. So once again, change management is key in this case, because yes, you will have resistance, not so much on the user side, but mainly in your travel and expense team.
That's great. Well, thanks so much. A question, I think I'm going to put this to Charlie. Could you expand, Charlie, on what the AI part in this tool is? Is the tool really self-learning? Could you expand a little bit more on kind of the AI intelligence element of the tool beyond just the automation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when AppZen as a kind of company started, we realized that there was this issue in the back end that, audit has never really been truly automated. When the solution was basically being built out, we went through 5 years of training the AI on specific T&E documentation. And in fact, it got trained on over 37 billion individual line item transactions to enable it to understand exactly what a T&E receipt is. So with that, we used a combination of technologies. So we've got AI-powered data extraction. So what that's basically doing is looking at that receipt, that invoice, that booking confirmation, email attachment, whatever it is that's being used, or photograph of a receipt. And it's scanning and reading and extracting and capturing every number, every letter, and every symbol on that receipt. Because only then, by being able to extract all of that information, can we then apply different technologies like computer vision and natural language processing and all of our learnings to fully understand what the context of that receipt. Is it a restaurant? What are the line items? Is it purely food and beverage? Is there tons of alcohol in there? Is there cigars? Whatever else that might be. And then basically, as part of that, once we've extracted and captured all of that and understood what the information is, we then have a semantic layer, which what we're then doing is augmenting that data. So effectively comparing and validating it against thousands of external data sources, as well as your internal policies and any other databases that may be seen fit by the organization. That then allows the solution to assess and refine the risk, which then that's what Richard was talking about, the low, medium, and the high, depending on your policies and what matters to you. When an auditor then makes a decision, so it gives the feedback, am I going to approve it? Am I going to reject it? Was there a false positive? Or was the risk correct, but within policy? Whatever that feedback is that's being given, we then have machine learning and deep learning, which takes all that information on board and then can provide that reporting back and suggestions through to say, well, hey, guess what? You're looking at revising your T&E policy. This is what we suggest. So by using that reporting to help you then make different decisions. That was in a nutshell, but hopefully that answered the question effectively.
That's great. Thank you, Charlie. Next question for Richard and Waqas as well. What did you learn about the behaviors of your employees by implementing this tool and getting this newfound visibility? Anything that surprised you?
I think Waqas was the one working mostly on this topic. So Waqas, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, so again, I mentioned earlier, it was difficult for employees to understand that their past behavior is being challenged now. So they in turn challenged us. So, but then we had a clear policy guidelines, a proper reimbursement guideline that we had to issue after that. And also, eventually, with the passage of time, they learned that this old behavior will not be tolerated anymore. And again, with the passage of time, they started to become more compliant by themselves, actually. And that was very evident by the numbers that we saw. And because it's also for the benefits, because if they start submitting compliance reports from the first go, they will get reimbursed much faster than if we go back and forth with rejecting expense report with explanation and all that. So yeah, so it was difficult in the beginning, but eventually they realized it's also for the good for them.
And if I can add to what Waqas said, what is also extremely critical here is that not only through T&E, of course, you start changing this behavior, but at the same time, the top management has a key role because they need also to explain to the employees that compliance is not something that we just, activate for pleasure. There's a real risk for the organization, and so compliance needs to be a clear focus, just like quality. You don't look at compliance at the end of the month. No, compliance is a daily topic that you have to keep in mind to conduct business correctly. So that's why this change in behavior was also kind of followed by a global change in mindset related to compliance within the organization.
That's great, thank you. Richard, I've got a listener asking about kind of the return on investment for AppZen. I'm not sure if you're able to share a specific number or not, but if not, could you just help maybe understand how you kind of calculate it and see your return on investment play out?
Yes, so of course, one of the first elements has been to look at the cost of managing expense report manually versus automatically. So that's one of the first elements that we took into consideration. After that, you bring new entities within the overall T&E solution. So what does it mean? It means that you create an increase in volume. And so we all know that when you increase volume, it gives you a bit more leverage to basically negotiate some interesting pricing with your suppliers. Of course, I'm not going to disclose any information related to that, if you don't mind. But this is the type of thing that you also bring. And at the same time, the change in behavior, what does it mean? It means that suddenly, because your policy becomes a bit more clear and stringent, the behavior of your employees starts to basically show some benefits related to the way they spend money. Ultimately, when you start adding all of that, you kind of start having a clear feedback on this reduction of cost that we were talking about. And so ultimately, on the long term, you really create some clear finance benefits. And because we are part of finance with Waqas, I can tell you that this was, of course, one of our main elements that the CFO was asking. It's great to increase compliance. And by the way, that's the last point, compliance. We know that sometimes compliance costs a bit of money because you have to invest. But we also know that when your organization is non-compliant, you don't know how much you're going to have to pay in terms of penalty. And this can go extremely high. So we, of course, didn't take that into consideration because it's very difficult to measure. But everything else that I explained is a key element to calculate your return on investment. And we definitely had a very positive one.
That's great. I see there is a second part of the question that's asking about cost model, but I think I'm going to let Team AppZen follow up with you after the webinar. We have probably just about 1 last minute for a last question. So again, Richard and perhaps Waqas as well. To what extent did AppZen help you with your kind of optimization process post automation? Did they give you best practice, or was it just the newfound visibility that helped you with your optimization efforts?
So it's true that initially, because we had those KPIs developed by basically Waqas, myself, and our kind of, we had a third-party company, a consulting company, Aon, working with us on this topic. The KPIs were the first element that we looked at, and we saw, unfortunately, that we were not expecting this drop in percentages. After that, AppZen basically helped us on the optimization, because suddenly you realize that you need to get into the details to understand even more what is, by the way, hidden behind, the percentage. And so when we started to analyze in details what AppZen was bringing us, we were able, in fact, to find the right triggers to create this optimization project. So basically, with the team in Airbus, with Aeon, that basically helped us on this topic, and with AppZen, we were able to kind of move forward and kind of, you know, pull the right different ropes to make sure that we were going the right direction. And this optimization project, in fact, has been once again a real success. So it's a real partnership between the Airbus team, the T analysts as well, of course, AppZen, and our partner as well, Aeon, on this topic.
That's great. All right, well, we are approaching the hour, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to Richard, Waqas, Charlie, for a really great presentation today. Thank you also for everybody who's tuned in. You've got some great questions, participating in the polls. We love seeing you on these events, even if they're still virtual, but thank you again. Thank you to everyone at Team AppZen, Team Airbus for all your prep in this. It's been really lovely working with all of you. Just to let you know, we have a few other webinars coming up. And we are doing a little bit of research around kind of intercompanies. You will see some little kind of pop-up research come up in your after the webinar. We'd love if you could participate, but thank you so much. We hope to see you at one of our forthcoming webinars. Thank you very much for your time today, and goodbye.
Thank you.